Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the World Economic Federation podcast. I'm your host, Brian Odhiambo, and thank you so much for joining us in our part two interview with Jonathan Finley, the architect of the World Economic Federation. So, if you are tuned in to our first episode, this is going to be a continuation. In the first episode, we talked about the introduction and the journey of the World Economic Federation and why our architect saw it necessary to build such a great movement. And today we're going to touch on a few topics. We're going to touch on a few topics, and Jonathan is going to lead us into it. So, John, nice to see you today. Thank you for joining us.
Nice to see you.
Good.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. So some of the topics that we're going to be talking about some are things like addressing veterans issues amidst recent developments. We are going to be talking about universal basic income and economic stability. We're also going to be talking about climate crisis and private equity solutions and a few other topics. So Jonathan, just so we can pick off from where we left yesterday, and we can start with the veterans issues. Seeing that you're a military man yourself, there have been reports about increasing homelessness about veterans due to economic downturns and inadequate support systems. So how does the federation plan to address these urgent needs in light of the current economic challenges?
Well, one of the reasons why I believe it's important for the Federation to have veterans programs is a lot of times, if there is a veterans program, it can exist completely independently from a system that other people care for, or care about, I should say. And that's one of the ways that programs like that can ultimately end up being underfunded because not everybody benefits from it.
Good.
So once the conflict is passed and various things along those lines, there's not large profits to be made from disabled veterans. And it's really more of a cost on society. So there isn't a lobby for veterans with the backing that you find for-profit entities, and the for-profit entities don't want to pay taxes that would pay for those various programs. So between the lack of interest on the corporations and the other side of the interest being more for making sure that there are as many people in the for-profit system as possible, there just is not the spending incentives to support the veterans programs in the United States or other nations that could support a more advanced veterans program. So when you take it even beyond the United States, then you're dealing with other countries that have their own means of raising a military, be it through conscription. Those people don't even necessarily have a chance to decide whether or not they're going to go into the military. And they can end up just as messed up as anybody, but does their country necessarily have a veterans program that's actually going to support them when everything is over with? So because the veterans community is generally a working class group, it just doesn't have the clout behind it to make sure that it has the financial support that has, for example, a military industrial complex.
Yeah.
Because while a major Wall Street company might benefit from a plane being built, you can't necessarily say the same about the for-profit healthcare system when the VA is a competitor to that.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of incentive to hinder what healthcare we have for our veterans, but also an incentive to make it so broken that it ultimately gets forced onto that for-profit system, where then that can be used to start charging for big checks from the federal government, which may or may not improve the quality of care for the veterans in the end.
Yeah.
So between the community that is seen more as a profit sector than a social commitment for a community in other countries which don't necessarily even have those resources, it seems like the veterans community as a whole could benefit from a international veterans organization that is trying to fulfill these roles on the part of these nations, because as long as those things are run by politicians, those politicians who unleash state violence on private citizens are going to be holding those privileges, those unique privileges over those veterans' lives, saying, if you want this healthcare, if you want this compensation, if you want this program, you're going to have to march on those civilians. Well, depending on the situation, you're not necessarily going to have soldiers with their loyalty to democracy. You're going to have soldiers with their loyalty to the politicians that actually effectively authorize the checks.
Yeah.
So putting the power of state violence as well as the power of the military and economics is so much consolidated power, because often what happens when you have someone with that much power is someone comes up and starts paying that politician to not do those certain things that that politician is supposed to be doing, like funding healthcare and all these various things, because someone else wants to profit from it. And then that politician is now being paid to literally not do their job.
Yeah.
And then that lack of support can then be used to turn that soldier against the people, saying, look, they're not willing to vote for all these things. I force them for it. And you know, they don't have loyalty to this country like you do. You put your lives on the line, and various other jingoistic narratives that they can leverage to divide the militaries that defend democracy from the democracy they're sworn to uphold and defend.
Yeah.
So by allowing a system through which the communities from which these soldiers emerge, the working class, their parents, their aunts and uncles, and various family members, they can actually say, look, we know our taxes aren't going to be going towards these programs. We know there should, but they're not going to. But working with the Federation to get these things done, that's something we can do to better look out for our veterans, because the families from which these veterans emerge, they have far more vested interest in the welfare of those young than the politicians who will never even remember their name.
Mm-hmm.
So by creating this as a conduit to create that system for their veterans, by creating a shared system where that healthcare is then also extended to the civilian community and it's a joint program, now you have a large enough insurance risk pool to actually have a viable system. Mm-hmm. And it's a system that sees its only job as the welfare of these veterans, their family, their community, versus the, well, I better keep this broken because eventually my donor wants to take over that contract. And things along those lines that create an incentive to not do the job done right the first time because they want to privatize it. Well, if things are already going towards privatization, I just as soon have this system be the vehicle for that privatization. So it's a system that actually looks out for veterans versus looking out to exploit veterans or profit from the suffering of veterans or their families.